Okay, that looks good. All right, and the poll will remain up for a few more moments until you submit your answers, and then it will disappear for you so that you can go back to just seeing John's screen. All right, so with that being said, I'm so happy to introduce John Traunfeld, who, of course, needs no introduction, but who is our specialist at Extension for growing food and working in community gardens. And he's also the director of our Home and Garden Information Center. So, with that, John, I will turn it over to you to present this awesome webinar.
Great. Thank you, Steph. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I want to thank Steph and Caitlin for hosting the webinar today. So we're going to be talking about community gardens, a topic I really enjoy discussing. And I hope this will be the first of many conversations that we will have about community gardens. We have a plan for having a training out in a community garden. Next summer, we're looking for some sites, and there's lots of great work to be done. So let's get started. So community gardens are fabulous places, not just for growing food, but for meeting your neighbors, for creating community, for learning new things. They have become, which something I think that's really interesting, a kind of a third place, meaning not home, not work, but a public place where people can come together and share their skills, their knowledge, their love of gardening and cooking and eating fresh produce. One of the things that more and more community gardens have been doing is making their gardens more accessible to more individuals. So in this photo at the top, we see an elevated, deep raised bed in a Montgomery Parks community garden. And below is a garden that is in a rural community in Allegheny County, Barton, Maryland. And it's a community that has been economically disadvantaged. And this garden that was created at a church in town has become a real bright light for the community and its members. So lots of great things happen at community gardens. They are also an essential part of our local food systems. And they can be so much fun. I was really thrilled to see all of these very interestingly painted raised beds when I was at an American Community Gardening Association workshop in Jonesboro, Georgia last year. And so this is part of the fun of being a community gardener, or just visiting a community garden. You often see people bring a lot of their individual creativity, which then fosters more creativity. The community gardens in Maryland, I don't know if there's a county in Maryland that does not have a community garden. I would be curious to know. I think most do. I think probably all do. And they have been around a long time. We see that they are located typically on public land, often connected to parks. In Baltimore City, they're located on many different vacant lots and also on private land, which I'll show a little bit later. There's a very high demand for community garden spaces in Maryland. I don't know of a garden that does not have a waiting list. And because Maryland is becoming more and more urbanized and suburbanized, it can become more and more difficult to find that open space that can be dedicated to community gardening. this is a real challenge for Maryland jurisdictions. These gardens vary widely in total size and also in terms of the different plot sizes that they offer the gardening public. And there's also a lot of variation in terms of how the gardens are structured, how formal or informal they are, and what kinds of activities happen inside and outside the gardens. And at this point, I would ask if people are either community garden members, if they are gardening in a community garden, or if, as a master gardener, you are assisting a community garden in your county, in your community. If you could just make a note of that in the chat, I think that would be really interesting for everybody to see. So we know that community gardens can help break barriers to food gardening access. So this list of bullets is not all inclusive, but these are the primary reasons that we have learned through research, through surveys, why people who might like to grow some of their own food do not or cannot. So there are lots of reasons. And excuse me, community gardens really provide a great opportunity to expand that access. This photo is of a garden that was started just last year. Last year was its first full year in operation. Excuse me, Lexington Park, Passive Park, community garden in St. Mary's County. And it's a very interesting garden. It has some individual plots so people can rent a single garden bed. There's also some communal space in the garden for people to grow together. And the garden leaders have made it a goal of theirs to include people who cannot afford to pay the plot fee for the garden. So they're trying to make the garden more accessible to low-income individuals in Lexington Park. And what I have noticed in working with community gardens over the years is that there are two newer approaches to community gardening, and I guess I would call it community food gardening, to create a more inclusive, broader concept than the traditional community garden where people are renting individual plots. So with community food gardening, we're seeing things like communal community gardens. So a garden that is not divided into plots. All the gardeners come on certain days of the week, certain times, to both cultivate together, harvest together, and then divide the produce. In some cases, these communal gardens are dividing the produce among the people who are gardening. I'm thinking about the Eric Waller Mount Washington Community Garden in Baltimore City. That's one of the larger communal gardens that I know of. But some of the newer communal gardens that I've seen are giving gardens. So the garden produce that gets harvested is being distributed to food banks and people in need in the community. So, and in addition, there are a number of community food spaces that have popped up. So I've seen this, for example, adjacent to, say, a local nonprofit, you may find there's a vegetable garden that is being maintained by not just the people working for that agency or working in that building, but other community members. And we see this at churches and other nonprofits typically. So community food spaces, not really what we think of as a community garden. And then the lower left here is a photo of the Charles County Food Bank Garden in Waldorf. It's a very vibrant garden. Master gardeners are heavily involved in the garden, and the produce does go to the food bank. So this garden is right there at the food bank. In the middle, we have a community garden at the library in Odenton, Maryland. And it's run by Farm Unity, a local nonprofit, and they've created community food spaces at a number of other locations in Anne Arundel County. One is at a school, another is at a nonprofit farm. So very, very exciting. I mean, to have a community garden at a public library, that's the first one of its kind that I'm aware of. And it's really been hugely successful. Master gardeners are involved. There's also a master gardener native plant garden and pollinator garden right adjacent to this community garden. And on the right, this is just a small sample of the thousands of pounds of produce that gardeners at the Long Reach Community Garden have harvested. So they're part of the food bank garden in that garden. And all this food is going to the Howard County Food Bank. So this is a giving garden within a traditional community garden. So lots of newer approaches. And I think community gardening will just continue to evolve to meet the needs of the time. And these are some vacant lot community gardens. So I started my career in 1989 with UME in Baltimore City. I was the urban gardening coordinator, and our little unit's chief goal, our mission, was to help communities start community gardens on vacant land. So in all three photos here, you're looking at gardens that are have been created on macadam, on rubble, areas where houses or garages were torn down. So basically no mineral soil, or mineral soil that was incredibly compacted. So in all these cases, the city provided truckload after truckload of what they call leaf mold. So these are leaves collected from city streets. They're piled up in windrows. They're not composted in the prescribed method that is usually used when municipalities handle green waste. They're just piled up. They are turned, but the resulting compost, a little bit rough, but it's built dozens and dozens of community gardens in the city. So no mineral soil brought in. These gardens are based on 100% compost, which is really pretty remarkable. So community garden work by all of us within the UME community, so that's faculty, staff, and master gardener volunteers. We've helped gardens get started, and we have served as advisors for community gardens. And I would venture to say that there are not that many community gardens in Maryland that don't have at least one Maryland Master Gardener there with a plot in the garden. The garden on the right, another example of a Maryland community garden. This one was at the Galilee Methodist Church in Queen Anne's County. For a number of years, the church basically allowed this community garden to develop on its grounds. The church was sold, and now the entire garden is being moved to a new site in Stevensville on public land. And this all happened due to the hard work of some of the gardeners who were members of the garden and our Queen Anne's County Extension Office, especially Rachel Rhodes, the Master Gardener Coordinator. So it's called the Kent Island Community Garden. I can't wait to see what it's going to look like. It's already being developed. The water system, raised beds, all going in. There are lots of partners. I know the Boy Scouts have been involved in some of the construction. So just a really cool project with UME's involvement. So now I want to just share a few slides about some of the educational needs and challenges that community gardens face. They are pretty complex endeavors. And so these are just some of the things we've learned over the years. The first four bullets in particular have been captured in research, through surveys, through journal articles. So these kinds of things come up over and over. Plant and pest problems, help with soils, identifying weeds and managing them. When should I plant my garden and what should I plant? And then the next four bullets are things that I've picked up myself in talking to community garden leaders and community gardeners, things that they're interested in learning more about. And maybe these could be some topics that you as master gardeners have been teaching in community gardens. Now there's a whole nother set of challenges and needs that have to do with how the garden's organized and operated. These are infrastructure needs and challenges. This isn't all of them, but these are the ones that, came to mind for me. And of all of these, we can look down the list and think, well, where and how could master gardeners possibly help with all of these things? I think the last four are particular areas that intersect with master gardener training and interest and, expertise. And maybe you've already been called upon to provide technical information or guidance with some of these issues. But even with some of the other bullets, for example, policies, some of the larger community gardens, the ones that are more well-established, do have sets of policies, written policies. And the garden leaders are very interested in having outside review, having experts help them determine, what makes sense. Most of the gardens that I've worked with, especially those that got started within the last 10 years, are entirely organic. So that adds another level of complexity in terms of the policies, what is going to be allowed and what's not allowed. So these are just some things I think we can all consider and think about in terms of, how we can support community gardens in Maryland. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the bigger concerns or challenges. And even if you, get involved with a community garden, you may not be developing their water system or needing to know a lot about the technicalities of how the garden water system is going to operate, but it's good to know some of the basics about how these gardens get and use their water. Most of them are on municipal water, which is really important, and we know it's potable water. They really vary in terms of how the water gets to the individual plots. So in this photo, this is Montgomery Parks. This is a large community garden, the Briggs Cheney Garden. They have large cisterns which are filled up, and then gardeners run their hoses. That's why you see so many different colored hoses to their individual plots. Some gardens have spigots arranged throughout the garden, which makes it very convenient for people to hook up to. And then in some gardens, drip irrigation is encouraged, and in others, it's not for different reasons. of course, we always want to see people using the best water conservation methods, mulches, watering around plants. And there are always issues with broken pipes, not enough water pressure, too few hydrants, et cetera. So this is a big challenge for community gardens, especially if they're being charged for water and then in turn have to include that fee in the yearly renewal fees that the gardeners pay. Soils, this community gardens are created many different ways. Oftentimes, native mineral soils are plowed to get the garden started, but not always. In the photo at the lower right, this is a small senior garden. There's maybe 8 or 10 plots. It's a senior housing development, and this deep raised bed is situated on macadam. No mineral soil, so it's filled entirely with mushroom soil, and the garden grows beautifully. Of course, everybody else is going to be in the soil, so to speak. So upper right, we can see what can happen if stormwater is not being managed properly. In a community garden, we can get erosion and runoff, which of course we don't want to see. So some of the challenges are, getting soil tested. And we have seen issues with lead levels being high in a couple of community gardens. So doing all this on the front end is really important. Working with the gardens on ways to improve soil health, evaluating composts that are being considered for the garden to make sure that they're going to be good. Helping people learn ways to keep the soil covered by planting densely, using mulches and cover crops. And that stormwater management is really important, especially as gardens are being created, before the plots are developed and people are gardening. We want to know, how is water going to move across the site? How can we mitigate problems and make sure that that water is going to slow down, spread out, and soak in? And I am actually seeing more cover crops being grown in community gardens, which is really exciting for me. This was at the Briggs Cheney Community Garden this past year. This was taken on the same day. So one of the raised beds, I saw there was a cover crop. This was May last year. The cover crop was still growing. And in another bed, and you can see the garlic garlic bed behind. In this other bed of cover crops, the gardener had already cut the cover crops. You can see some regrowth of the wheat or rye, whatever this grass cover crop is. And of course, at this point, they could continue to cut it to weaken those grass plants, because grass plants want to continually retiller and put out new sprouts at the base. Or the gardener can come along and smother the cover crop with a tarp. Weeds are a big issue in community gardens. So weeds within plots, along the fence lines, and certainly with plots that are neglected for a short period of time or for the entire growing season. So on the right, we see a plot of lamb's quarters primarily. A gardener was having difficulties getting out to the garden. And all the gardens have different policies for how they deal with this issue. One of the things I've encouraged the community garden leaders to do is use heavy duty weed barrier material or silage tarps to just come in and cover those neglected plots. So rather than let them continue, the weeds to continue to grow and perhaps set seeds, and which will infest neighboring plots, we can just go in there and either cut everything down and cover it, or just cover it without cutting it down first, and that'll smother that vegetation. And then we can come back and, other gardeners can make use of it once the weeds are killed. So this is just it's a short list of some of the more significant weed species that we see in community gardens that really can create big headaches for the garden leaders and the gardeners. Here's Bermuda grass, top left, mugwort. And what's interesting here is behind the mugwort, you can see what looks like a lot of landscape fabric and compost. And what happened in part of this garden was that landscape fabric got laid down and compost and or wood chips were placed on top. And what happened over time was different aggressive weeds were able to germinate in the wood chips and compost on top of the weed barrier material. And then they send their roots down through the weed barrier into the soil. And that just knits the weeds and the fabric together and makes it so difficult, especially if it's something like Bermuda grass, nutsedge, or a mugwort. So using weed barrier material correctly is really important. You do not want to add compost or wood chips on top of it. And then in the photo here, we can see a couple of different methods being used. This is prior to planting warm season crops, using, looks like a tarp, a black tarp in the background there. And then in the foreground, cardboard, which certainly is another good material for suppressing weeds. Oftentimes, community gardens find out too late that they have a serious issue with either an aggressive weed or, in this case, a food plant that has either been intentionally or inadvertently introduced to the garden and can become a problem. So this is, again, not the exhaustive list, but some that I have seen. Certainly wineberry, we know, is an invasive species. We want to eliminate it, but so many gardeners are enamored of it because it makes delicious fruit. So we have to really try to convince people that, no, we need to, okay, harvest the fruit and then we're getting rid of this plant this year. And so that's a biggie. Perilla, we see oftentimes. Garlic chives can spread. Mints, of course. Jerusalem artichoke really shouldn't be in a community garden, but I do see it growing in community gardens. It's hard to maintain. Horseradish is another one that people can keep it somewhat contained, but it can be aggressive. Callaloo is basically pigweed, and so if it sets seeds, those seeds can end up all throughout the garden and become a significant weed problem. This plant here is water spinach, Ipomoea aquatica. It's really an excellent all-season green. You can cut it all season long. I've seen it in a few community gardens, but everybody should be aware that it is considered a noxious weed in Florida. And I know now in Virginia as well, as an aquatic weed. So this is a plant that will grow in water, but it does fine in well amended soils with a lot of organic matter, as long as it's watered regularly. So if you do see it in a garden, and I don't see it go to seed, but that doesn't mean it couldn't. We just really need to keep an eye on this. I would be really wary about introducing it to a community garden. And then there are the many pests and diseases that bedevil community gardens. So what's different about these pests in community gardens? Well, if a pest goes unattended in one plot, it can quickly spread and become a community-wide pest. So here are a few examples of issues that can quickly build up. Viruses, cucurbit viruses, there are a number of them. And I often see lots of symptoms in different plots across the community garden. These viruses are transmitted by insects. So once the virus is in the plant, they're systemic. There's really nothing that can be done. But it is, these are insect vectors spreading it. On the right, we've got Mexican bean beetle. 2 or 3 generations a year. And oftentimes people will let these populations build up even after they're done harvesting their beans. I see, rows of just decimated bean plants with all life stages of Mexican bean beetle going at it. And then at the bottom here, harlequin bug, huge pest of all members of the cabbage family. And here it is on red Russian kale. So one thing I've noticed is that community gardens that begin to really adopt row cover material and insect screening material, their problems with these community-wide pests get reduced dramatically. Above all other methods, hand picking, organic insecticides, this is the best way to reduce insect pest populations, starting early in the season, transitioning to insect netting so that we're not warming the air up underneath the netting during the summer months. So when you're working with community gardens, you really have to have that community pest focus and think about, and I'll tell you a couple of things we've done in the past. We've helped community gardens obtain a little parasitic wasp that will parasitize Mexican bean beetle larvae and release it through the garden, and that was effective. What else have we done? Oh, and planting trap plants of beans. So in mid-April, planting beans on the corners, bush beans on the corners of the garden. And so once the Mexican bean beetles start to emerge from their overwintering slumber, the adults go right to those early bean plants, and we can let the numbers build up and then just rip those plants out. So we're interrupting, the population there. So there are some approaches we can take, community level approaches. This is something I saw when I was down in Georgia. I thought it was fantastic. I got the file for it. And so maybe we could reproduce something like that. This sign is 5 feet wide. It's on the side of a large shed in a community garden. And, we're working on getting some nice 8.5 by 11 laminated insect pest ID cards with management information. But I thought this was really such a great approach, and to have this kind of a sign in the garden. Signage is super important. So here we've got compost bins in community gardens, and composting is handled very differently in different gardens. What I've noticed is more and more gardens are entrusting a committee of gardeners to deal with how garden waste is composted. So we've got the composting capacity on site. We've got bins or piles, but maybe we don't want just anybody to come up and throw their refuse in, because we've got a hot pile and a cold pile, and we want to make sure that what's going in is going to compost, in a reasonable period of time. We don't want people dragging branches into our piles. So for all these reasons, people learn pretty quickly that this is a really important aspect of the overall gardens operation, and we need signage to help people understand what the policies are. Another place where signage comes in is trying to dissuade folks who are walking by the garden from stealing produce or anything else that's in the garden. And that's handled lots of different ways. And that may be another area where you as a master gardener may have some really good ideas to contribute to help community gardens develop the right messaging, so we remain a welcoming, open community space, but want to let people know that stealing is not okay. And maybe that, we've got lots of produce to share with people. Just come and talk to us. So I just wanted to now talk a little bit about some of the roles that I've seen master gardeners play, and roles that I think we could be playing or maybe do more of. And so um, helping with the design and planning of a new garden. I know that Baltimore County is working with a church right now in Randallstown to help them develop a community garden at their church. So the Lexi, the master gardener coordinator, and some of her master gardeners are meeting on site with that group to help them assess the site and think about how it should be laid out and what goes into creating the community garden. I mentioned the rules and policies. I think we have a lot of expertise to bring to bear there. I know I've been asked to do this many times. And then the education component, which of course is the main part of our mission. And that's what we want to be out there doing in community gardens. There are lots of ways to do it. And I think principally that means being in the garden with the gardeners. And we can talk about different options there. Answering questions and solving problems. So that could be by having master gardeners assigned to a community garden where they can be accessed through email or where they're visiting the gardens on a regular basis, doing garden troubleshooting walks. And of course, we've got the Ask Extension service here through Home and Garden Information Center. Partnering on garden events. I've seen that a number of times. I also have seen in a couple of cases, master gardeners who were involved with pollinator gardens actually creating small demo gardens within the community garden, on the edge of a community garden, but in the community gardening space. Identifying new possible garden sites. If we know we've got a lot of demand in our county, we should be on the lookout for possible new sites and let folks know that there could be some opportunities. Maybe some conversations need to be had so that we can find out if this site really could work out. And advocating for more gardens. I mean, part of what we do in Extension is community development work. That's part of what we do as master gardeners. And so advocating within our counties for more garden space would certainly be a positive thing. So here are just a few examples of master gardeners and master gardener coordinators in action. On the left, Prince George's County has this fabulous community garden summit that they have pretty much every year. And I attended a few years ago. So here's Esther Mitchell, the master gardener coordinator, and two master gardeners, Linda Campbell and Betty Giddings. So they're participating with education, with information. A bunch of our master gardeners in Prince George's County have either started community gardens, play a leadership role, or have plots in community gardens. In the middle here, this is at Lake Elkhorn Community Garden. In the red shirt, Kent Phillips, and this is Patty, a master gardener intern. Kent's a master gardener, so they're there holding kind of an informal plant clinic. So gardeners are alerted that the master gardeners are going to be here. We bring samples in. We ask them to bring samples. So what would you like us to identify, to talk about? And then we walk through the garden, plot by plot, and look for issues and help address problems and answer questions. And on the right, this is actually a plant and pest diagnostics continuing education class we had several years ago in the Frederick News Post Community Garden in Frederick, Maryland. And on the right is David Munns, a master gardener. So he was, talking about how the community garden operates and some of its challenges. So community gardens are just a great learning space for us as master gardeners to do continuing education in, but also, of course, walking around and teaching gardeners informally and formally. So in thinking about where we are as an organization, we already are doing a lot, I think, with community gardens. That's part of why I asked you to put into the chat, your involvement in your county. We want to know more. so I wanted to think about, what could be some possible next steps? Uh, Things that maybe we're already doing or things we could do more of. If we haven't already, made contact with the leaders of our community gardens in our county, we could do that and we could visit with them. We could find out what their needs are and we can let them know what we've got to offer through extension. We can make sure that we're visiting community gardens and building that relationship, learning more about their needs and showing that we have lots of resources and knowledge to share. We can also find out if other programs in our office, our FCS or 4-H programs, are there people interested in community gardening or already working with community gardens? How can we pool our efforts? And then we can try to begin to make contact with potential partners like food banks and health departments. And I think one of the things I don't know if I've seen it yet, whether a community garden has had its garden certified Baywise yet. We, of course, have our food gardening yardstick for the Baywise landscaping program. So this could be another avenue or another way to approach community garden leaders. And we've got this really cool program. We can train gardeners about Baywise practices for the food garden, and then we'll get you this really groovy sign that you can put up in the garden. We know that a lot of community gardens have signboards, so I would encourage you to help keep those signboards updated with the latest UME resources. It's also useful if we're thinking about how we can use our educational abilities, in helping community gardens to look at some of the identified mistakes of first-year community gardens. So gardeners, these are some of the things that we've learned over the years that people have struggled with. So knowing these things ahead of time can help you tailor your educational program, your messaging to the gardeners. But of course, step one is finding out what their needs are, what they're thinking about, what they're interested in. And then I just thought about some of the potential partners out there. I did learn this summer more about funding opportunities, the mini grants available through the Chesapeake Bay Trust that do support community gardens. And when we share this PowerPoint, I will definitely include some of these resources. American Community Gardening Association has fabulous resources online. The Watershed Stewards Academy. So they are more interested now in working with us on food gardening efforts because they see that food gardening is very important to their clientele and people who they want to bring aboard in terms of environmental education. Maybe the first step is, hey, if they're interested in growing food, let's connect that to our environmental outreach education. And so I think we have a lot of opportunity there. Religious communities, there are many community gardens that are actually at church and synagogue sites, immigrant and refugee groups. So the photo here is a garden that's no longer there. It was in Highlandtown in Baltimore. It was the International Rescue Committee was the group that instigated the garden. It was really a fabulous garden with people from all over the world, growing their food plants, sharing knowledge and information, just an amazing experience. And so, reaching out to those groups, finding out if there are opportunities to partner. Food banks, of course, food councils. There are a number of active food councils in counties across Maryland and in Baltimore City. Food banks are, I think, a key partner. I already mentioned the Charles County Food Bank Garden. Here it is. And then those food bank gardens that we have in some of our Howard County community gardens doing such great work. And this is part of the crew that does the gardening and the harvesting of that food. So either helping a food bank start a small garden at their food bank, or using a community garden to, enlist gardeners to help produce food that can be given to food banks. Those are some great opportunities. The Maryland Food Bank in Baltimore has a fabulous learning garden. I would actually propose this as a good site for us to visit as master gardeners for a continuing education event. This is Kate Long. She runs the garden. They have different themes in the garden. So her whole goal is to bring the food bank folks who come to pick up food at the large warehouse there off of 895, to bring them into this garden to talk about how they could start a garden at their own food banks. And I just wanted to stress how great it is to be visiting community gardens, gardening in a community garden. You can learn so much. For me, one of the things I like the most is learning about different crops, different world crops, like sword lettuce and different African eggplants, roselle, hibiscus, used as a leafy green all summer long by Southeast Asian gardeners, bitter gourd, so many really cool plants to learn about, and so many amazing techniques that people have developed that they're, displaying in their plots. A walk-in tunnel. This is covered with insect netting. The gardener can actually walk in it. This really cool tool holder, I guess, made out of a recycled pallet, and an amazing elevated strawberry table that I saw at Lake Elkhorn Community Garden. So really cool stuff. For the state master gardener program, these are some of the things that I've been thinking about, and I hope after today, we don't have to wait till next year when we do plan to have an in community garden training event. But before then, we need to, have more conversation about how we can better, educate and train ourselves to work with community gardens, and how we can reach out to community gardens and find out, what kinds of specific things they would like from us. So more training is always good. We can develop educational materials. I showed that big signboard, of pest in the garden. So we can really work to find out what community gardens would like to have in terms of laminated, handouts that they can use in the garden or post on their signboards. We can also survey our Maryland community garden leaders and community gardeners, and find out what they're interested in, what their challenges are. We know some of them. We think we know others, but why not find out directly from those folks? It would also be really great to bring together community garden leaders from Maryland and maybe adjacent areas. We did this back in 2010 at Brookside Gardens. We had a summit, and folks from Virginia and DC and Maryland attended. We haven't done anything like that since. And I intend to update and improve our community gardening resources that we have on our website. And the last thing I thought about was, I mentioned I was at a 2-day training in Georgia. So the ACGA folks are very good at training garden leaders, and they take their show on the road. They charge a fee, but if people are interested, that may be something we could pursue to do something like that in Maryland. And I just took a picture of the big, thick handbook that they provided to each person as part of the training. So that's another option. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I know that we already have one that we get all the time. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to chat about it. But the type of wood that folks should be using for their raised beds.
Sure. So I think we did update our webpage on that,
Yeah.
and actually added a nice little bit of research from Oregon State University. So what we know is folks can safely use um, the copper treated pressure treated lumber. It is safe to use in a food garden. And so it has been researched. There's no arsenic in it, and the levels of copper are very low. There's very little that is going to leach out and that would elevate copper levels to any kind of a dangerous level. So I would definitely recommend that type of lumber for building raised beds.
Awesome. Okay. There was a comment in the chat that it would be great to have educational materials that are editable to customize for folks' specific situations. I think maybe if like different community gardens are in different situations, folks are looking for resources for that. So that's a great suggestion. Thanks for that, Elizabeth.
I would say if Elizabeth could send more specifics to me so we can get that conversation going, I would really appreciate that.
Awesome. There were some comments about the composting signage, and also noting that the produce was for donation and asking folks not to pick it, that I thought was a really good conversation. And we were having some issues with folks taking the produce from the garden at the state fair. And so Caitlin made a really awesome sign for us and also got it translated into Spanish. Just noting to folks that our produce is for donations. So if they needed it, then they needed it, but otherwise, please leave it for us to donate. So that was really good. Um, okay, there's a question for the Q&A. Are there county or municipal governments that have used public money to create and support public community gardens? Is it a good idea for Master Gardeners as a group to advocate for that kind of public support?
Yes, and yes. So the most notable county in that respect would be Montgomery County. They, I forget how many total community gardens they have. It's either maybe 11 or maybe a few more than that. But anyway, they have created a number of new community gardens in the last 10 years. And some of these gardens have cost as much as $250,000. So they have invested in good fencing, good water systems, really good infrastructure. They put a lot into it. Other counties have supported community gardens with grants. But I think helping municipal governments, county governments understand the benefits would go a long way to convincing them why, it's important. So in terms of food insecurity, human health, physical health, mental health, improving the ecosystem actually of a particular area. So yeah, we should be advocating for that. And I hope more county governments, it's tough budget times, right? It's very difficult. So finding all different types of ways to make a community garden happen, I think is important. It may not come directly from the coffers of the county government.
Right. And just to kind of agree with and add to a little bit what you mentioned, that it's important for them to be aware of the benefits that these things can provide. We hope to share everyone's stories as much as possible. So in the chat today, you all shared some incredible programs and projects that you're all doing, and your work with community gardens. And so if you're posting those on your social media or if you have pictures, please share them with us. Any of us, myself or John or Caitlin, anyone at the HGIC team, we can get that onto HGIC's social media, and that will be a whole new audience to see the incredible work that you're doing. So please use us as a resource to help you get the word out about this incredible work that you're all performing in your communities. Okay, so the next question is for um, communities that maybe don't have as much financial resources as others. What do you recommend for containers, to build containers for them to grow in, and then also for fertilizer for those communities?
Good questions. For containers, the fabric bags would be the cheapest option and they'll last for a number of years. We have found for fertilizer, that really depends. So if cost is the biggest factor, some of the liquid fertilizers would be a good value. I know the slow release fertilizers are better in terms of, releasing nutrients over a longer period of time, but they will be more per ounce or per pound. Making sure that your bags or containers are at least 50% compost, because that'll also provide free nutrients.
Absolutely. Okay, and then the next question is, what are food councils?
So these are organizations. I don't know how many of them are incorporated as 501(c)(3)s, but they're connected to county government, or sometimes county governments will authorize their creation. And it's usually citizens, could be farmers, could be gardeners, people from social service agencies, the health department, people who are really interested in reducing food insecurity and improving the local food system. They meet to try to assess the needs of the overall county and determine a plan for how to achieve goals, like we want more community gardens, or we want to see more kids learning about farms, or they have lots of different goals. But if you have one in your county, you can certainly find out about them by going online. They have public meetings. I met with the Anne Arundel County Food Council person about community gardens, that, and because they're interested, they want to see more happening. So it's a great resource.
Awesome. Okay, we have one of our MGs doing a children's activity about raised beds. Do you have any suggestions for what children can do that are about ages 4 through 9?
Yeah, I don't, but Deborah, if you can put your email in the chat, I'll connect with you, because we have some colleagues who would have some good ideas along those lines.
Awesome. Okay, and then we have the next question is about accessibility. Are there any suggestions on the best salad tables for those that are in wheelchairs?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of commercial products out there, elevated gardening tables for people who are using wheelchairs. The salad tables that we've built in Maryland, we know how high they need to be for wheelchair accessibility. The problem with our salad tables are the water just drains right out the bottom. And so they wouldn't be suitable unless there was a way to collect the water. But all that information is available. The American Horticultural Therapy Association has lots of resources on that very topic. A
Um,
good Oh, thank you, Steph.
sure. No problem. There's also another one from that I'm going to drop in the chat from the New York City Parks Association. They also made plans and directions for raised beds. So I know they're not exactly salad tables, but it's pretty similar. I think you could do similar programming with them. Okay, so back to the Q&A. Um, John, Kathleen Breen says she's also interested in ideas for children. So if you could include her,
Okay.
thank you. Okay. How to get and keep volunteers to help with a joint church slash food bank and master gardener vegetable garden.
I'm sorry, I was writing something down. Could you
Oh,
repeat
sorry,
that,
that was
Steph?
my fault.
Sorry.
Yes, how I think they're looking for advice on how to get and keep volunteers,
Oh, gotcha.
help with a joint
Um,
church slash food bank and master gardener vegetable garden.
That's a good question. I don't have any simple answer. I mean, I don't know if this garden is at the church, or not, Karen, but,
Mm.
I think bringing as many people out into the garden space as possible and interacting with people, interacting with the plants and learning about the garden, why it's important. I mean, I think that's how you can generate that visceral interest in people. It's always hard to solicit and keep volunteers for sure. I think in terms of keeping volunteers, it's helping them learn new things, finding out what they want the most out of the experience. But of course, as we know, as Master Garden volunteers, our interests change and, our situations change. So that's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Oh, it's
think
at the church,
struggle.
yeah.
Yeah, we
Well,
struggle.
having a service outside in the garden.
Right, absolutely. I think the more exposure people get to it and the more people get excited about it, and the more you're able to build excitement within the group and make it sort of a group thing, that would be great. Um, and I think if you can try to make it work for them. So for us, we're thinking about it in terms of the garden needs to be cared for, this food needs to be grown, and it needs to be donated. But if you can kind of think of who is in your congregation and what is it that they need, is it people who need socialization opportunities? Could you bill your maintenance as sort of a garden party type thing where they can come and spend time together and get to know each other? Or maybe you have a lot of youth participants in your congregation and maybe they need service learning hours for school. And that could be something that could fulfill those hours. Or if you have folks who are looking to learn how to do this in their own home, could you make it educational and maybe plan some sort of learning event in the garden that also includes a volunteer aspect where after they've been instructed on what to do and how to care for it, um, they could also do some volunteering and do that as practice to kind of help with whatever tasks that it is that you need in the garden. So I think with a congregation, you're looking at a diverse community and a broad audience that needs a lot of different things. And so maybe trying to think about how you advertise working in the garden to maybe suit some of those needs. All right, so that is all of the Q&A. So John has put his information for his teaching evaluation into the chat. So all of our faculty are evaluated on the programs that they teach. So if you have a moment, please check the chat, grab the link and the information there for submitting a review on John's presentation today. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. It was lovely having everyone here and learning together. If there were any links that we shared in the chat, please go ahead and grab them at this time, and I'll go ahead and stop the recording.